Alright everyone, I've flown on airplanes quite a few times, Airbuses and Boeings, doesn't really matter, and I don't really think too much about it generally speaking. Air travel tends to be relatively safe. I think train is the safest method, at least up until East Palestine of course. But planes, by and large, I mean, there's a trillion of them taking to the skies each year, and only a few of them ever have any major problems. But lately, we've been having more of them. And partially, I think in the wake of that original story some weeks ago, of course, there was that one Boeing that lost the side panel on the door and in flight, and so you get hypoxia if you don't have the oxygen mask working. More focus was put on the issue of airline safety. There's that picture right now circulating on Twitter of that one plane from the Uzbekistani Airlines or something, and it's all dilapidated and probably should not actually be allowed to be in flight at all, but somehow they're allowed. I'm not exactly sure why, by the way. But now we've had another incident. United Airlines flight actually lost a panel mid-flight. And then you have the Boeing whistleblower, of course, John Barnett, who just supposedly killed himself. Despite the fact that he was being very open, he'd complained for some time, hey, the problem is that they're rushing the production schedule. They're having to cut corners. They're using subpar components, and it's a rush job because the demand's high, and they're looking out for profit margin basically. So yeah, not every plane is necessarily fully structurally sound, and that's just going to be a thing that happens. Maybe a rivet is loose over here, a panel is a little bit off over here. Generally, they're going to fly anyway, and they'll be fine. But there's an increased risk that something happens. And then, of course, now we got word today from his friend. He'd called and said, if I die, it's not suicide. Then he kills himself shortly thereafter. I don't know that I believe that story. I think that there are shenanigans afoot, and it's sort of like with Jeffrey Epstein, only he's not a pervert like Epstein, or there's no evidence of that. It's like, yeah, the cameras switched off, the guards were away, you were just taking off suicide watch, and then another dude hears you screaming in your cell and shit like that, but, there's no investigation is needed. By the way, you're never going to get that client list. When things line up like that, usually it's not coincidence. I do not believe that he killed himself. I believe that he was whacked, probably by Boeing. And so we have this insider scoop by a person that worked with them saying, look, I was physically there for an extended period of time. I can personally vouch for the fact that they are cutting corners. Then you have a string of incidents that are in the public conscience. And Boeing's stock tumbling, predictably. Its stock price will repair, but only when they fix the issue, because otherwise you're going to apparently keep having random panels flying off the side of aircraft. Now, if that happens when you're over ground and you're near an airport where you can land, it might not be as much of a problem. But one of the other things that Barnett claimed is very problematic should this happen, let's say, over the Atlantic Ocean or over the Pacific Ocean. And that's that sometimes the oxygen masks don't work properly. I think he said something like 10% of them wouldn't deploy properly or something like that in an emergency scenario. So you're going to kill off 10% of the people on your jet going over the Atlantic? You're going to land, they'll be all bloated and shit. People be poking at their bellies. They'll be bloated with gas by then. Or half frozen. They'll die of hypoxia generally. That would be a little bit of a logistic nightmare. It's the sort of thing that can literally bankrupt a company. It doesn't matter if you're a major supplier of military goods and you're like the biggest provider, I think, of aircraft and aircraft components in the entire world. Not going to matter much. You won't be the largest for long. You'll be taken down a peg. So it's like, when I fly across the Atlantic and go to Europe, I'm like, maybe I need to investigate which particular kind of aircraft I'm going to be flying on when I make that itinerary. It's concerning enough that I'm like, even if the odds are really low that something happens, do I want it to happen at, at altitude, 1,000 miles away from the nearest airport? Probably not. And so that's going to be a thing. I'm going to have to take that into consideration. Normally, it's a no-brainer. It's like, okay, generally, with air travel, things are pretty safe. They check every aircraft before it lifts off, and they go through multiple checks on the runway. Sometimes it's a little bit burdensome, actually, like flying out of Washington, D.C. Now, the flight itself is short to Burlington Airport. But, they're taxiing around and repeatedly checking the flaps and the engines and everything else. I think it took almost an hour to actually take flight. I know it's a busy airport, but geez, I mean, logistically speaking, isn't there a better way to design them to make them a little bit more efficient? The world may never know. Certainly that development won't happen first in the United States. It'll happen in Japan or Dubai or something like that. What the fuck is happening with Boeing? How can a company, I mean, you're basically going Bud Light mode. Especially when you kill the whistleblower, which is probably what happened. All you do is it's the Streisand effect. He can't complain anymore about rushed production schedules, but now, he's constantly in the news all over the internet. For those in the know, of course, CNN ain't going to cover it much, but it's there for people that are actually wise enough to be, interested consumers of information from third-party sources. It's actually a little bit confusing because normally when you look at like multi-billion dollar corporations, you expect that the people at the top are intelligent, and so they're strategic, and so they're going to be relatively on point with messaging. They've got a system worked out where they're like, okay, here's this is how we're going to do public relations and stuff, and you would cover ass instead of you would recall some of the planes or something and say, well, it's a problem with this specific model. This particular component from this one factory was an issue. Don't worry, everyone. We'll get new planes in there. You're safe flying with us. But that's not what they did. It's not what they did at all. They're effectively putting their heads in the sand. Now you've got another incident. Again, several incidents in a short period of time. That's going to keep it in the news cycle. It's not entirely clear exactly why their branding is so poor, and this is Boeing, so you're like big ass military contracts and stuff. Are you cutting corners on the planes that you're supplying to the U.S. military? Are our nuclear bombers actually capable of making it to the target right now, or is the crew just going to die of hypoxia? That could be a problem too, by the way. It's a logistical nightmare for Boeing, and I would not want to be their CFO right now. That's about all. Peace out.